permits an outside leader to come along and attract the loyalty of his men away from him deserves no more than he gets. It is no mere accident when men go on strike, become unreasonable, demand wages which are not being earned in profits by the employer, and other things equally as impossible, as they sometimes do. It is, or should be, a part of the employer's business to keep his men informed on the capacity of the business to pay wages. Also, it is no mere accident that we find men in some places of employment who are happy, satisfied, industrious, and loyal. Yes, there are such organizations, and there could be many more of them if employers would study this law of attraction a little more closely. The human mind will not tolerate forced control. Prune a tree, and you strengthen its trunk and roots. Destroy the sense of hearing, and the other four senses, or some of them, will be correspondingly increased. The law of compensation sees to it that nothing is destroyed. You can burn a tree, but you cannot destroy that which composes it. Its elements will go back to their original source. You can turn water into steam, but you cannot destroy it. In time, it goes back to its original state. So it is with the human mind. It can be suppressed and controlled in some of its activities, but it will become correspondingly stronger in other directions. Anything that is imposed upon the human mind against its will starts that mind to work endeavoring to find another outlet for its energy. This is a principle which lawmakers would do well to remember. The passing of kings, czars, and kaisers is but the latest manifestation of this principle in operation. The Imperial German Criminal Code of 1870 was signed by Bismarck and William I. The sedition sections quoted were enforced against newspapers, labor organizations, and socialists with great severity by Bismarck. The result was unexpected. The Socialist Party became the largest in Germany, and, in general, so much patriotic loyalty and devotion to the form of government was generated that a harness maker is now president of the German Republic, and Kaiser Wilhelm II is studying windmills in Holland. Sections from the Imperial German Criminal Code. High treason and treason. Section 81. Anyone who undertakes by force to alter the constitution of the German Empire or a federal state, or the succession to the crown established before such a date, shall be guilty of high treason and be liable to penal internment or military detention for life. If there are extenuating circumstances, the punishment shall be military detention for not less than 5 years. Section 82. Any act directly tending to the carrying out of the intention shall be regarded as an undertaking by which the crime of high treason is completed. Section 83. If several persons have agreed upon the carrying out of a treasonable undertaking, but their conduct has not amounted to an offense under Section 82, they shall be liable to penal internment or military detention of not less than 5 years. If there are extenuating circumstances, the punishment shall be military detention of not less than 2 years. Section 85. Anyone who publicly before a crowd, or by declamation or public placarding, or public display of writings, or other representations, incites to the carrying out of an offense punishable under Section 82, shall be liable to penal internment or military detention not exceeding 10 years. If there are extenuating circumstances, the punishment shall be military detention of from 1 to 5 years. Chapter 2. Insulting a reigning prince. Section 95. Anyone who insults the Kaiser, his reigning prince, or during his residence in the federal state, its reigning prince, shall be liable to confinement of not less than 2 months, or military detention of from 2 months to 5 years. Section 97. Anyone who insults a member of the reigning house or the regent prince of his state shall be liable to confinement or military detention of from 1 month to 3 years. Chapter 3. Opposition to public authority. Section 110. Anyone who, in public and in the presence of a number of persons, or by the circulation of statements, the public exhibition of placards, or the public distribution of written documents or other representations, incites to disobedience of law, or any lawful proclamation, or an order made by a competent authority, shall be liable to a fine not exceeding 600 marks, or to confinement not exceeding 2 years. And finally, Section 111. Anyone who incites in the manner aforesaid the commission of a punishable act, if a punishable act or attempt results therefrom, be similarly liable as an instigator. If there is no such result, the punishment shall be a fine not exceeding 1 year. In no case, however, shall the punishment exceed that laid down for the act itself. You are a composite of the words you speak, the literature you read, the thoughts you harbor, the company you keep, and the station in life to which you aspire. It is to be noted that the Kaiser's punishments were not so severe as those meted out by American judges in 1919. Verily, it is written in the Scriptures that he who lives by the sword shall die by the sword. This applies to you and me as individuals, just the same as to kings, czars, and Kaisers. We can forestall what our finish will be by analyzing what we are now in our dealings with our fellow men. This is no mere preachment. You have heard it before. It is true. But possibly you have not thought seriously that it applied to you. The ex-Kaiser, perhaps, made the same mistake. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. There is no escape from this law. It is as broad as the universe. It governs every person on earth. We can sometimes get around man-made laws, but this eternal law of compensation? Never. Back of this law we may find the real reason why it pays to be honest. We may fool ourselves into believing that we are getting by this law, and for a time it may appear that we are evading it, but eventually it rounds us up and forces an accounting. A little dishonesty and a little experience in lying is good for a person. They act as their own witness and present their own proof that they will not work. Control of steam has been a mighty fine thing for the human race because it has lightened man's burdens and aided in man's progress. But control of the human mind is another matter. The one and only true method of controlling the human mind is that which is self-imposed through the aid of education. Educate the human race. Teach men and women the whys and the wherefores of these eternal truths that we have been presenting in axiomatic form and in mere preachments. Let people know why it pays to be honest, why it pays to be decent with one's fellow men, why the outward acts of humanity correspond exactly to the nature of the thoughts which dominate the human mind, and human beings will need less controlling. They will learn how to control themselves, just as the more intelligent of the human race are doing now. Enough scientific knowledge has been passed on through the pages of this magazine since its birth in 1918 to change the entire trend of the human race in a single generation, if it were systematically taught in the public schools. There was enough sound instruction in The Great Magic Ladder to Success, in the March 1920 issue, to so change the attitude of man toward man in a single generation that jailhouses and penitentiaries could be torn down or turned into asylums for the treatment of those who grew up in ignorance of these principles. This is no mere bouquet that we are handing to ourselves. It is a conservative statement of a possibility, and we shamefully admit it. Chapter 14. Tolerance. The 14th billboard on the road to success is tolerance. There are 3 powers which, if properly organized, could change the entire customs of the world in a single generation. If a great leader and organizer should arise and form a union of these 3 forces and succeed in getting them to work in harmony, wars could be permanently eliminated and men could be taught to submerge their individual interests for the good of the race. And all this could take place within the time of this writer. If we ever have a successful League of Nations, it will have to be created by and through these three great forces, or else it will not permanently endure, nor will it serve the purpose for which the present proposed League was organized. Never, in the history of these great forces, have they worked in harmony with each other in any understanding. Never have they organized themselves so there was complete harmony of purpose in the individual ranks of the three. Yet, the individuals composing these three great forces represent the highest strata in human civilization. A first-class football player who understands the value of teamwork and the necessity of organization might become this great leader if he were a man who could get the confidence and the cooperation of the leaders of these three forces. These three great forces are 1. The churches of the world, 2. The schools, public and private, and 3. The newspapers and magazines. Unfortunately, these three great forces are divided among themselves, so that there is neither unity of purpose nor of effort in their ranks. The churches are divided among themselves, but not hopelessly so. There is no doubt that all of the churches of the world could agree on concerted action in furthering a great movement which would supplement the work of each, and at the same time, lay the foundation for a higher civilization. The same could be said of the newspapers and magazines. Newspapermen have always given freely and willingly to the support of every movement that was for the benefit of the masses. The public and private schools, through their directions, constitute the most important factor in this trio of great powers, because educators understand the principle which we are about to mention, and for the further reason that any ideal can best be planted in the minds of the young during the early school period. Any ideal could be so permanently planted in the minds of children through the joint efforts of these three great powers that it would be impossible to erase it, except through the manner in which it was planted. A human being is the product of two causes. One is physical heredity, and the other is environment, or mental heredity. Every ambitious workman on earth is potentially an employer, because he is looking forward and planning the day when he can start a little business of his own. Take the child of an uncivilized person soon after birth, remove it from its parents, and place it in a modern home under the influence of a cultured environment, and that child will absorb most of the tendencies of the children in that home with whom it is raised. That which it inherited through physical heredity will remain with it forever. But from the moment of birth on, it will take on the tendencies and the nature of those with whom it closely associates. 99% of the people of the world hold certain views of religion, politics, economics, and the like because those views were inherited from their parents or those with whom they were most closely associated before they reached the age of 12. Think it over. You don't have to go outside of your own experience to prove the truth of this statement. This being true, can you not see the importance of selecting with care that which is permitted to reach and influence the child mind before the age of 12? Can you not also see how any ideal could be forced on the mind of the child through systematic efforts upon parts of its early trainers, thus molding its mind after the ideal? Here in America, a great problem has arisen to plague us. We have become the melting pot of the world. The people of every nationality, of every creed, and of every temperament have flocked to our shores. These people have minds that are molded and set. Their viewpoints do not harmonize. The man and woman who was raised in southern Italy have but little in common with those who were raised in America. When they come together, they find themselves incompatible. This great melting pot, this land of milk and honey, has attracted from other countries that class of people who come from the lowest strata, for the most part, the class which usually wants as much as it can get, and is willing to give no more in return than it is compelled to give. a class which lacks culture and refinement. There is not much that we can do to quiet the spirit of unrest among these adults, but we can assimilate their offspring by forcing the American ideal on them in our schools, churches, and through our newspapers and magazines. And what is our American ideal? Frankly, I do not know. I know what it used to be, a little over 100 years ago, but interest in that particular ideal has waned considerably. The original American ideal has run out due to our neglect or our lack of understanding of the principle of social heredity, the only source through which any ideal can be kept alive and passed on from one generation to another. Some things we have kept alive through this principle of social heredity, which we might well have allowed to fall by the wayside. For one thing, we might have profitably allowed our spirit of intolerance to die with generations which have passed. But it's still with us because there has been no tendency to pass its opposite on to our offspring through social heredity. Instead of the old American ideal of which Washington, Jefferson, Paine, Franklin, and Lincoln were examples, a new ideal has developed within the past 50 years. This new ideal is the mad desire for money. This desire has been passed from one generation to another through social heredity, the offspring trying to emulate the parents in their rush to gain wealth. Men now look forward to becoming millionaires instead of great statesmen. They devote their efforts to personal gain instead of working for the good of the race, as did the prominent men a few generations back. We strive to emulate Rockefeller and Carnegie instead of Washington and Lincoln. It may be best not to condemn that which you have not investigated, because this habit is an indication of a mind that is ruled by ignorance and prejudice. This writer rises to remark that we need a few Washingtons and Lincolns along about now. To whom may we turn in our search for unselfish leaders who are willing to submerge their own personal interests for the good of the race? In the approaching race for the presidency of the United States, we see some 8 or 10 aspirants for the office, and not a single man among them is above suspicion, from one quarter or another, that his desire for the presidency is to gain more power instead of the unselfish one of rendering service for the good of the nation's masses. Not a single piece of material, which even remotely resembles Washington or Lincoln, has been offered as a presidential possibility. But this is getting away from our main issue. That this lack of material exists, all of us will agree. The important thing is, how can we develop the right sort of material? And the answer is, through the principle of social heredity. Through the combined efforts of the churches, schools, and newspapers, we could grow a superabundant crop of Washingtons, Lincolns, and Jeffersons within a single generation. Not only could we do this, but we could change the whole thinking process of the world, replacing the desire to get with the higher desire of giving, the common tendency to tear down with a nobler one of building up, the selfish desire for personal aggrandizement with the higher one of submerging personal interests for the good of the race. The time has come for a round-table meeting of all the churches of the world, all the newspaper and magazine publishers, and all of the educators. When these three forces reach out across the distance separating the continents and begin to work in unity, with harmony of purpose, the world during the next few generations can be made to resemble whatever they wish it to resemble. Meanwhile, there is much good that these powers can do for the adults of the world through the use of the right sort of propaganda. The leaders of the German Empire have shown the world what can be accomplished in a single generation through the application of the principle of social heredity. Let us not so soon forget this lesson. We defeated the Germans on the battlefields of Europe, but the price we paid in order to do this was in vain unless we follow this defeat with a greater victory here at home through the power of social heredity. It lies within the power of the churches, schools, and newspapers to control the world by establishing a new and higher ideal in the minds of the individuals through the principle of social heredity. If these three great leaders do not grasp this wonderful opportunity, the responsibility for our continued unhappy state will rest upon their shoulders. If the churches, schools, and newspapers would pool their efforts and systematically force the Golden Rule philosophy upon the minds of the next generation, wars, both between nations and individuals, could be eliminated. The desire to get without giving could be wiped out. The tendency to work for selfish personal gain instead of submerging personal interests for the good of the race could be wiped out. The hive spirit could be permanently injected into the human mind. There is plenty of everything in this world for all, but until the individual develops a passion for helping the weaker of the race, instead of exploiting him, a few will continue to have more than they need or can use, while the majority will remain in poverty and want. No law, no voting power on earth can change this. The change can come through only operation of the principle of social heredity. There are some bees in every hive which would starve to death if it were not for the hive spirit, in which the individual works for the good of the hive. In fact, every bee in the hive would starve to death during the winter if it were not for the hive spirit through which the honey is pooled for the good of all. When I see men trying to solve these great economic problems by disputations, argument, organization of physical force, political parties, and the like, I think of the little dog which runs along and barks at a passing train, foolishly imagining it can stop the train. The very men who are clamoring for the upper hand in the industrial world today, railing and cursing the present leaders of industry, would find themselves in the receiver's court in a few weeks if the industries of this country were turned over to them, because they lack leaders who are sound in economics, and for the more important reason that they would be unwilling to submerge their individual interests for the good of the whole, thus leading to disagreement among themselves. Who will be the first to step out of the ranks and become the great organizer and leader, using the principle of social heredity as his co-worker? The man who does this, if he be a real leader, will do more for posterity than any man of the past whose record history records. Study carefully for the hidden motive which actuates the man who tries to fasten his leadership on you without your consent. And may it not be possible that we need a few more men and women who are unselfish enough and whose vision is broad enough to make it their business to sow a crop of wholesome seed for the future generations? Our ideas, like our forests, are rapidly being dissipated and depleted. The field in which they can be resown is the human mind, and the process through which this sowing can be done is social heredity, which means ideals which we plant in the plastic minds of our young. One generation of this systematic use of the principle of social or mental heredity will raise our ideals as high as we aspire to raise them. If Germany forced culture on her young through the churches, schools, and newspapers in a single generation, we can force the Golden Rule on ours in the same length of time because the principle is effective and easily applied. Every educator, every first-class newspaper editor, and every church leader understands this power, which we refer to as social heredity. But there will be no quick results until all of these work in unity, in an organized manner. Perhaps the interchurch world movement offers the nucleus for an organization of these three great forces. If so, and the right sort of a leader is available, this movement can easily become the most far-reaching of any in life history of the world. The thing about which I am writing seems to be a gigantic undertaking, but it can be completed at less than the amount which the Panama Canal cost, within about the same length of time. Let me repeat my statement so it will not be forgotten. The churches, schools, and newspapers could within one single generation, so thoroughly establish a new ideal in the minds of the world that men would turn their efforts toward helping the weaker of the race. They would do this just as naturally as they now exploit the weaker of the race. This could be brought about through the principle of social heredity, planting an ideal in the minds of the young. I am tempted to say that the schools alone could successfully do this work. I am sure the schools and churches combined could perform the task, although it could be done in less time through the aid of organized propaganda through the newspapers and magazines. Control that which the child is taught in school, that which is taught in the church, and that which is published in the public press, and you may be sure that the power which does this controlling will have in a single generation the exact sort of an ideal it desires. Funny little men run about here and there, preaching this, that, and the other panacea for the world's evils, few of them having the remotest idea how to put into operation that which they offer as a remedy. They remind one of so many geese chattering and flopping their wings just before feeding time, grumbling because the keeper is late with the feed, but having not the slightest idea how to hurry him along. In all this talk about the League of Nations, in all this talk about the downtrodden working class, not one single intelligent solution has been offered, because those who had formulas foolishly expected to apply them to and through the adult mind in a few months' time. I suspect the world's evils did not arise overnight, but to the contrary, they have arisen out of ages and ages of misdirected efforts through a blind application of this principle of social heredity. If you must slander those whom you do not like, be careful not to speak your grievance, but write it in the sands near the water's edge. I suspect that if some bright, far-sighted chap had started a movement about 2 or 3 generations ago, with the object of supplementing the work of the churches, schools, and newspaper with a practical application of the Golden Rule, as it applies to the world of economics, the history of the world would be different today. This could have been done, just as it can now be done, through the principle of social heredity. The man who offers a remedy for the world's evils and expects it to become operative through any other principle knows nothing of the nature of the human mind. You can tame a wildcat by taking the young animal away from its mother's breast before she has had time to instill in its mind, through this same principle of social heredity, fear of and antagonism toward man, but not afterward. The same principle applies to the higher animal, man. If man ever learns how to be decent to his fellow men, he will learn it because of an ideal that was forced on his mind before he reaches the age of 12. Make no mistake about this. All the preaching in the world will not change this. Man no longer fears fire and brimstone in the next world. Therefore, if he treats the weaker of his race with kindness and extends them the helping hand, he will do so because he wills to do so. And he is not apt to will to do so unless this desire is planted in his mind as an ideal, while his mind is plastic. The human mind is the only great mystery in the world which should interest human beings, because the human mind, when properly directed, can transform the most common sort of person into a genius. If you understand even the elementary principles of psychology, you know exactly what is meant by the term social or mental heredity. Also, you understand the soundness of the suggestions concerning the possibilities available to the world through the organized efforts of the churches, schools, and newspapers. If you have never given much study to psychology, get some good books, those that are written in simple layman's language, on this subject, and inform yourself. To familiarize yourself with the principles of the human mind is to understand the only real power on this earth that can help you get to wherever you are going in life. If this editorial should cause you to take an interest in the study of psychology and result in your reading upon the subject and thinking about it as you read, it no doubt will mean an important turning point in your life. To save you the trouble of looking up a good book on psychology, I am going to quote the following by Arthur Brisbane, which appeared in the Chicago Herald-Examiner. This about your brain. A rich boy inherits an automobile, orders the chauffeur to bring it around, takes little interest in the machinery. A man who has worked for the money to buy an automobile tries to know about it. It interests him. We inherit our brains, get them ready-made at birth. Few know more about the wonderful thinking machine at the end of life than at the beginning. Whatever of you amounts to anything is the mysterious power working through the brain. What actually does the work, soul, as some tell you, will, as others say, chemical reaction, as materialists believe, we cannot know. But we can know about the machine that lives in the dark inside the skull, receiving information from the outside world through one set of nerves and through another set issuing orders obeyed by muscles and bones. Read among many good books on the subject, Brain and Personality by W.H. Thompson, who understands his subject. It is published by Dodd, Mead and Company. Men originally did not know that feeling and thinking dwell in the brain. The word brain does not occur in the Bible. When the book was written, it wasn't suspected that the cold, gray organ isolated in the skull had anything to do with thought. Babylonians and others later believed that thought was in the liver. Their priests carefully examined for information about the future livers of animals offered in sacrifice. The Jews believed that the soul was located in the heart, the mind in the kidneys, the gentle emotions, compassion, etc., in the bowels. Therefore, the Bible says, his reins, meaning his kidneys, instruct him in the night seasons. Elsewhere it is said, the Lord trieth the heart and the kidneys. And Jeremiah denounced the hypocrites who, he said, had the Lord in their mouths but not in their kidneys. Aristotle decided that the brain had nothing to do with thought, and it was a refrigerating plant to cool off the blood. One man, Alcmaeon, who lived before Plato or Aristotle, taught that the mind was in the brain. He based his belief on discovery that total blindness was caused if you cut the optic nerve leading from the eyes to the brain. Otherwise, men scouted the theory until the great Greek Galen, physician to Marcus Aurelius, revived and proved it. Broca, scientist who died in 1881, was first to understand the human thinking machine. The part of your brain with which you speak is called Broca's convolution. He located speech in the rear part of the third frontal convolution. Injury to that part destroys speech, absolutely. When that Frenchman successfully explored the brain and taught how it worked, he did more important exploring than 1,000 Perrys, Livingstones, or Stanleys. As you possess 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 hands, and 2 feet, so you possess 2 brains. Each brain is complete, separate, and can, if necessary, do all the work of thinking, just as 1 eye, if necessary, can do the work of seeing. Money and happiness, the 2 great objects of life, never have been attained and retained except through rendering useful service. If you are right-handed, the convolution in your left brain does the talking. If you are left-handed, it is the right-handed convolution that talks. If the talking part of the brain is destroyed in a young child, the other brain can be taught to talk. In a man of 50, injury to Broca's convolution destroys speech for life. The brain becomes hardened with age and, like an old dog, cannot be taught new tricks. We are born with no knowledge of speech. Each new brain must be taught everything from the beginning, speech included. Education begins when a baby points to its hand and is told the name of the thing to which it points. If you tied the left hand of a child, compelling it to point only with its right, speech would surely begin with the left brain. If you tied down the right hand and compelled the child to point with its left, it would be left-handed, and the right brain alone would learn to speak. Seeing, hearing, recognizing our friends, tasting, smelling, everything that we do has its separate place in the brain, as a book has its place on the library shelf. Your brain can be so damaged as to make it impossible for you to recognize members of your own family, although you would see them. Injury in another place would destroy sight. One injury would make it impossible for you to tell one sound for another, the bark of a dog from the song of a bird. You would hear noises, but not know their meaning. Another brain injury would make you deaf for life. As the left-handed man speaks with the right side of the brain, and vice versa, so the man left-handed hears and understands sound only with the right side of the brain. Nobody knows how the mind works or what the thought is that enables a two-legged animal glued to this earth to measure accurately the distance of a fixed star billions of miles away, weigh the sun, or announce with accuracy the weight of this earth. One theory teaches that the mind is like an Aeolian harp,